With my boarding pass in one hand and my suitcase in the other, I stood at the departure gate. There was a buzz of enthusiasm about our long awaited trip, but I felt nothing but a spooky silence inside. There was a problem I simply didn't know yet. The purpose of this trip was to provide us adults with a unique opportunity to bond without the distraction of children running around. With the assurance that it would be just what I needed, my parents had spent months organizing everything. Mom had emphasized in a hard but loving voice, "Lena, you deserve this. Just have fun for once. The kids will be fine with Mara." I had done everything so correctly. Stocked the refrigerator, left thorough directions. Before leaving for the airport, I made 2 calls to my loved ones. I was ready to stop being mom and start being Lena again. Then she entered the room. Haley, my sister. Her 3 children were right behind her, following in a frenzied, sugar-fueled line. I blinked. We had decided that this trip was solely for adults, right? Small backpacks dangled in all directions. Snacks were half-eaten and held in sticky fingers. Chattering over each other were high-pitched voices. 5-year-old Mason, Haley's youngest child, was there, climbing onto a chair in the waiting area, like it was a jungle gym, and laughing as he tried to jump off. With a knot in my stomach, I turned to face my parents. "Wait, what's going on?" I said in a measured, cautious tone, attempting to avoid raising any alarms. Mom hardly gave me a look. She waved a dismissive hand. "Oh, Lena, don't look so surprised," she replied, as though I were being absurd. Dad laughed next to her, as he often did. "It's different with Haley's kids. They're no trouble at all. Not a problem." I gazed first at them and then at Haley, who dared to give me a smug little smirk. She flipped her hair over her shoulder and smiled. "Calm down, Len. My children are angels. You won't even be aware of their presence." Mom mentioned that at that moment. It was those words that made my spine tingle. We just love them more. I thought I misheard her for a moment. She hadn't just said that, surely. As if it weren't a knife to my chest, she grinned as if it were the most natural thing in the world. I shook my head and chuckled dryly, my heart pounding in my ears. "Pardon me?" "Oh, don't be so sensitive, Lena," she reprimanded, her tone brimming with disdain. "We just mean. Well, they're easier," she sighed, as if she was already sick of this debate. "They pay attention." After a moment of hesitation, she shrugged and said, "They're more adorable." I felt like I was slapped across the face by the word. My thoughts immediately turned to my own kids, my adorable, intelligent, and lovely babies who were at home at the moment, presumably wondering why their mother had to go away without them. Haley's children weren't much more endearing. They didn't deserve it more. Simply put, they were the most favored grandchildren. And my children? Not even a plane ticket was worth my children. My voice was calm, but only slightly, when I said, "You lied to me. Don't be dramatic, Lena," Dad said with a weary sigh. "You are aware of Haley's struggles, 3 children and a single mother. She was more in need of this than you were. She was more in need." I turned to face Haley, expecting her to notice the disaster this was, to say something, anything at all, but she simply shrugged, unconcerned. That's when it dawned on me. This was no coincidence. There was no misunderstanding here. This was a decision. They never even thought to explain or apologize for their purposeful, premeditated decision to put Haley and her children before me and myself. My pulse was like a sluggish, simmering fire under my skin as I tightened my teeth. I'd been justifying things for years, telling myself that I was only imagining the favoritism, that perhaps, just possibly, I was being paranoid. Now, though, it was indisputable now. I also had a decision to make. Be the submissive, quiet daughter they'd hoped I would be, or, at last, advocate for myself. I took a quick look at my boarding pass. Next, at my family. Back at my boarding pass after that. Abruptly, I realized exactly what I needed to do. Their decision had been made. It was my turn to make mine now. The buzzing of the airport subsided into a low drone as I clutched my luggage until my knuckles became white. My parents were still talking. Haley was looking through her phone. Her children were already causing trouble, and none of them had even acknowledged the storm that was raging inside of me. Mom groaned and rolled her eyes as if I were having a fit. "Lena, stop being so dramatic. You're acting like we abandoned your children on the street. They are at home and completely secure. In my ears, my heart thumped. I responded, "That's not the point," in a steady, deep voice that was piercing beneath. "Lena, we just thought it would be easier this way," Dad said, shaking his head in frustration. "With the kids, you're constantly under a lot of stress. We reasoned that you would have more fun without them." I laughed hollowly, the type of chuckle that comes out when you're just a second away from losing control. "So this was for me then? Whoa, how kind." I looked at Haley, who continued to tap on her phone as if she didn't care. "How about you? You thought you wouldn't mind bringing your kids?" I said, my voice growing sharper. Mom shifted uneasily, as if she was now beginning to realize that I wasn't merely irritated, I was angry. She lowered her voice as if I were a child and whispered, "You know how hard things are for her, sweetie. 3 kids, no father around. She needed this more than you did." Once more, there it was. That expression. This was more important to her. Something broke inside of me. "You keep saying that," I exclaimed, raising my voice now to break past the din of the airport. "Do you even hear yourselves?" Sensing the tension, people turned. "You told me it was for adults only, so I left my kids behind." You looked me in the eye and said this was about reconnecting, but really? "You lied to me," I growled. "Simply put, you didn't want my children there." At last, irritated, Haley looked up and said, "God, Lena, just let it go. It's not the end of the world, it's a vacation." The last straw was that. I let out a quick exhale, my choice obvious. This was not a journey I was taking. Not with them. No more. I turned on my heel and headed for the exit, saying, "Enjoy your vacation," in a tone so serene it was lethal. Mom gasped behind me, saying, "Lena, stop being so dumb. Where are you heading?" "The plane is about to board." "Not for me," I yelled behind me. Dad's voice had become rougher and more irate. "Lena, you have no right to behave like a child over this." I stopped because of that. I slowly spun around and looked him in the eye. Behave like a kid? That's rich. Coming from the people who just told me straight to my face that they love Haley's kids more than mine, I said, feeling uncannily composed. Mom went pale. Dad tensed. With a dramatic sigh, Haley said, "Lena, please stop being so sensitive. My children are present." "Is it your desire for Mom to expel them?" I laughed a bitter, genuine laugh. I answered icily, "No, Haley, since I didn't want her to expel them. I only wish she would consider me to be as significant as you are. Just once." Mom started to say something, but I stopped her. After turning, I left the airport. I continued. Not when I heard my name being called by Mom. At least not when Dad mumbled something. Not when Haley sighed dramatically again. I simply continued to walk. It was a blur on the way home. My thoughts replayed everything, repeatedly, like a terrible joke I couldn't get out of, and my hands gripped the steering wheel so firmly that I was shocked it didn't break in two. For years, I had gone above and beyond for them, ignoring the situation, making justifications. I told myself I was thinking too much about it. However, today, they had said the silent bit aloud today. They loved Haley's children more than anything else. They had always been more important to them. I imagined my children waiting for me while they sat at home, awaiting grandparents who had never given them priority, who had never handled them in the same manner as Haley's children. Abruptly, I realized it was more than just a journey. This was all about it. My children always received smaller presents than Haley's on holidays. At every birthday celebration, my parents would swoon over her kids while hardly mentioning mine. Each time, I was made to feel inferior. Not anymore. I had already made up my mind when I turned into my driveway. I wasn't simply leaving the vacation. I was turning to leave them. Permanently. I spent a lot of time sitting in my car and gazing at my house. My kids were waiting for me inside. I should have felt better when I was at home, but all I could hear were my mother's remarks, which echoed like a curse. We just loved them more. Something inside of me had been broken by that one sentence. Something brittle. For years, I had been frantically trying to keep it together. My entire life had been devoted to establishing my worth, attempting to gain the same level of affection and acceptance that Haley had so easily. For what purpose? For them to plainly tell me that my kids weren't as important? I felt a knot form in my throat. Not anymore. I inhaled deeply before getting out of the vehicle. 2 tiny figures rushed toward me as soon as I opened the front door. "Mom!" Emma, my daughter, flung herself into my arms and gave me a tight hug, her curls bouncing. My son, Noah, squeezed my jeans with his small hands as he clung to my leg behind her. You've already returned? I was meant to be on my adults only trip, but my best friend Mara, who had been minding my kids, peeked around the corner looking confused. What took place? Her voice was laced with apprehension as she asked. Placing Emma down, I mustered a grin. I'll explain later. Mara, who knew me well enough to notice that something had changed, looked at my face and nodded. Something profound. As I ran my fingers over Emma's curls, I returned my attention to my children. Did you two enjoy yourselves? You were missed. Noah put his arms around my waist and pouted. My heart tightened. They were worthy of better. Instead of grandparents who viewed them as a bother, they deserved grandparents who wanted them there. I held Noah close as I kissed the top of his head. Baby, I missed you too. So much. I set my phone in front of me as I sat at the kitchen table that evening after putting the kids to bed. My mom had made 4 calls. My dad twice. No, Haley. That should come as no surprise. I accessed our family group chat and ignored the missed calls. The same conversation in which my parents were always swooning over Haley's children. It was the same conversation in which I had been silent for years. No more. I got to typing. I will not be accompanying the trip. Additionally, I will no longer be a member of this family. I paused for a moment, then continued. I've been treated like a lesser person my entire life, as if my kids were smaller. You stated today that this would never change. I'm done then. Avoid calling me. Please refrain from texting me. Never again should you expect anything from me. With my heart thumping in my ears, I read it again. Then, without hesitation, I sent it. The following morning, Mara discovered me standing in the kitchen, flipping pancakes as if nothing had occurred, and even though the air smelled of butter and syrup, my hands were surprisingly steady. Arms folded, she leaned on the counter and muttered, All right, raising an eyebrow. Spill. I'm done with them, I said as I slipped a pancake onto a plate. Blinking, Mara said, Your parents? Without looking up, I nodded. She whistled softly. Whoa, what happened? After putting down the spatula and letting out a breath, I told her everything, the deception, the treachery, the words I couldn't stop hearing, and how my parents had made it very evident that Haley would always come first. Mara was holding her coffee mug so firmly by the time I was done that I was afraid it may break. That's terrible, Lena. She shook her head and exhaled. Trying to hide it, I shrugged and said, It's not surprising. That doesn't make it okay. Her piercing tone broke through my barriers. My throat constricted as I looked into her eyes. No, I said, it doesn't. So what now? Mara said, setting down her mug. I inhaled deeply. I now concentrate on my children, on our existence. I've pursued their approval for far too long. I no longer require it. After examining me for a while, she grinned and said, Good. For you and your children, you're worthy of better. Better. I nodded as something inside of me calmed down. I wasn't eager for my parents to see me for the first time in years, because I was able to see myself at last. It was not long before the ramifications started. Initially, there was quiet. I went a whole day without receiving a single message or call from Haley or my parents. I pictured them sitting in their hotel suite, drinking drinks, and rolling their eyes at my flamboyant antics, and I knew they had read my message. However, I was also aware of something they were not. I wasn't playing a bluff. On day 2, my phone began to ring. Mom. My stomach clenched as I watched it vibrate on the kitchen counter. I didn't respond. She made another attempt an hour later and then twice more that night. Then Dad called. Then Haley. It had been months since her name appeared on my screen. I paid them all no attention. The texts began on the 3rd day. Mom, we need to talk, Lena. You're overreacting. Let's be sensible. Dad, stop this bullshit and give your mom a call again. Haley, you're genuinely upset about this, Lena? Get over it. I chuckled bitterly as I gazed at the messages. Not even an apology. Not a single acknowledgement of any wrongdoing. They continued to believe that I was merely having a tantrum. As if I were a mere child, they could chastise me into compliance. The tone shifted after the 4th day. Mom, this is absurd, Lena. You can't just cut us off. We're family. Dad, do you realize how much we've done for you over the years? You're being self centered. Then the one who forced me to sit up. Mom, we need to discuss, Lena. Your father and I need financial assistance. I read it twice to be sure I wasn't dreaming, and then I blinked. And there it was, the true cause of the unexpected worry. I thought it would happen someday, but not this quickly. They had no fear of losing me. They feared I would stop supporting them. The realization was like a kick to the gut. I had been going above and beyond to make my family happy for years. More times than I could remember, I had provided them with financial support by paying their bills, giving them money, and taking the fall when they overspent on unnecessary items. I never gave it a second thought because, well, that's what family does. But as I looked back, I came to a realization. I have never received assistance from them. Not at my difficult time as a new mother, not during my divorce proceedings, not while I was struggling to make ends meet. While they lavished Haley with unending support, assistance, and justifications, I had been left alone. And now, when they understood that I was actually going to leave, making amends was not their first impulse. I was being guilt-tripped into returning, not because they were missing me, because I had to provide them with something. Something changed inside of me that night as I put my children to bed. I had had enough of feeling bad. I grabbed my phone and opened the text message that was with my mom, inhaled deeply, and entered, "You're correct, Mom. I can't simply stop talking to you. I should have done it years ago." I then clicked send. My phone came to life a few seconds later. Mom. I allowed it to ring. I had stopped playing their game. I woke up to a barrage of messages the following morning. More of the same at first. Mom, this isn't how families treat each other. Lena, please, let's talk. Dad, this is not how we brought you up. But the insults began when I didn't reply. Mom, you're selfish and ungrateful. Dad, after we're gone, you'll regret this. Then the last blow. Dad, all right. Don't come running back when you realize you made a mistake if you want to pretend you don't have a family. I spent a lot of time looking at that message. An error. No. I made the error of assuming they would ever care as much about me as I did about them. I took a deep breath and locked my phone. I shifted my attention to the few individuals who were important. My kids. Now they were my family, and that was more than sufficient. A week went by. Next. 2. The phone calls ceased. The communications became slower. After a while, the quiet descended. And something unexpected arrived with it. Calm. I wasn't awaiting their approval for the first time in years. I wasn't trying to win their affection. I wasn't straining myself to get attention. I was merely surviving. And yet, even though I felt lighter, I still had pain in one area of my body. Not for my folks, not for Haley, but for another person. Alternatively, for a person who had never visited. I thought I would miss them, the incessant texts, the calls, the duty to maintain harmony, but the silence pressed on my home's walls for weeks like something heavy, something alive. However, I didn't. It felt light to be gone. I wasn't getting up every morning for the first time in years, fearing the next favor they would ask me or the next manner they would remind me that I was never quite enough. I gave my everything to my children and the little rituals that bonded our days together. Movie evenings on the couch with Emma nestled under one arm and Noah snoozing next to me. Pancakes in the morning and sloppy crafts in the afternoon. It ought to have been sufficient. It was sufficient. However, I was unable to identify the thing that was still eating away at the borders of my tranquility. Or perhaps I simply didn't want to. Late one night, long after the children had gone to sleep, it dawned on me. My phone flashed up on the counter while I was tidying up the kitchen, the TV buzzing softly in the background. Jason. It made my stomach turn for a moment. He had made it clear the day he left our marriage that he was just in their lives now because he had to be, and we almost never spoke other than via emails and brief conversations regarding the children. Interesting, I replied. Hey? The pause on the other end was too long. Then Lena. I was informed of everything. I tensed up, wrapping my fingers tightly around the dish towel. How? He let out that tired old sigh. Your mom called me. My heart stopped beating. I closed my eyes tightly, already aware of the outcome of that exchange. What was it, she said? That you've been behaving strangely. He hesitated and said, "That you're making things difficult for the family. Unstable. Naturally, they couldn't just let me go, they had to make me the issue." I shook my head and let out a hollow laugh. "What did you tell her too?" Bracing myself, I asked. Jason was silent for a long time, so long that I nearly hung up. His voice was firm, even cautious, when he said, "I told her to leave me out of it. I don't care about it, and that they need to be appreciative that you're even open to speaking with them." I blinked, taken aback. Jason had never stood up for me, not even when we were married or when I had pleaded with him to come see our family. "Wow," I muttered. He laughed dryly and said, "Yeah, don't get used to it." In that instant, something changed between us, a gap in the wall we had both so meticulously constructed. He said, "I know I messed up, Lena," admitting that he was a pathetic spouse. "However, the way they handled you wasn't fair. You didn't." The lump that was growing in my throat was swallowed. Hearing him say that hearing him finally see me felt like closing a door I hadn't even realized was still open, even though we would never be friends, never be anything more than co-parents. I said, "Thank you," in a voice that was almost audible above a whisper. Another extended gap ensued. "Take care of yourself, Lena. You too." I sat at the kitchen table and stared at the phone in my palm after I hung up. Long before he ever left, Jason had been a ghost in my life, always half present, half invested, and always leaving me to bear the burden of our family by myself. In some way, I had been pleading for his affection for years, as if I had been pleading for my parents' love my entire life. I had gone on a ghost hunt, people who never really existed. People who, if they loved me at all, could only love me in fragments. Emma carried her teddy rabbit by one floppy ear as she padded into the kitchen the following morning. "Mom? Yeah, baby?" I asked, looking down from the stove. "When will we next visit Grandma and Grandpa's house?" My heart tightened. With syrup stuck to his fingertips, Noah sat up at the table and said, "Yeah." It had been ages since we last saw them. The moment weighed heavily on my chest as I carefully put down the spatula, wondering how I could explain to them, two innocent tiny souls, still tender and trusting that the people who were meant to love them without conditions had only ever desired them when it was convenient. I crouched next to Emma and brushed a curl away from her cheek. "We're not going to see Grandma and Grandpa anymore." Her tiny forehead furrowed. "Why not?" I took a deep breath and spoke slowly. "Because, occasionally, we are not treated fairly by our family." Emma gave me a wide-eyed blink as she thought about that. "And when that happens," I said, tucking her hair behind her ear, "we have to make our own family one that loves us the right way." She looked at me for so long that I questioned whether I had said too much or whether I had unintentionally broken something delicate inside of her. Then she simply nodded. Okay, that was the end of it. For her, it was that simple. I wish I had had it that simple. A knock on the door came a few days later. I went cold. I never had somebody just show up at my residence. I felt sick to my stomach as I peered through the blinds. Haley. I briefly thought about ignoring her. However, a part of me that was still trying to let go needed to understand her purpose for being here. I didn't move aside when I opened the door. "What are you looking for?" She shifted her weight and let out a big sigh. "Wow, not a hello?" I stopped playing her games and crossed my arms. "All right. I came to talk about Mom and Dad," she said, rolling her eyes. "There's nothing to talk about." Haley's expression darkened. "Lena, hurry up. All right, you've made your point. You're angry. However, months have passed. Your folks are still with you." The sound of my laughter was sharp and bitter, yet it tasted like liberation. "No, Haley. They were my parents, unless they explicitly stated that you will always come first." She opened her mouth, then shut it again. The glimmer of something behind her eyes caught my attention at that moment. Not remorse. "I'm sorry." Since she was aware of my correctness, I spoke softly as I leaned forward. "I've had enough of being second best. I'm tired of being the stand-in daughter. And I'm done acting like I don't mind." Haley's mouth twisted as if she wanted to fight back, but she was unable to do so, and her eyes shot away. Nothing remained for her to stand on. "Jesus, Lena," she said at last. "You're quite dramatic." I grinned. "Perhaps. However, at least I'm no longer a doormat. And I was the one who closed the door this time." Mara arrived that evening with 2 bottles of wine under her arm. Your sister arrived then? I poured a glass for each of us and nodded. She grinned and said, Let me guess. She wanted you to forget and forgive so that things could return to normal? Snorting, I said, nailed it. Mara smiled broadly as she reclined on the couch. And I told her to get lost. She lifted her glass. Damn right you did, the quiet continued. Months passed. My parents didn't give me another call. Haley never arrived at my door. I didn't miss them either, not once. I had my children. Mara was mine. I was at peace. I was finally not pursuing love for the first time in my life. I was using the fragments they had left behind to construct something new, something complete. And that? That was more than sufficient. Like the wind whispering through the trees, time moved slowly. I discovered that a silent protest could be more powerful than an unspoken apology. My parents didn't give me another call. Haley remained out of the way, licking wounds she would never acknowledge existed. The silence felt odd at first, as if I had entered a new existence that I had not yet fully come to terms with. I kept waiting for the pain to return, for the guilt to reemerge. However, it never did. In front of me, the days were broad and gentle, full of a calmness I hadn't experienced since I was a young child. There was no weight on my chest when I woke up. Out of habit, I stopped looking at my phone, anticipating messages that would never arrive. And something inside of me began to blossom gently, so quietly that at first I almost missed it. Emma played in the yard one evening, her curls wild, her laugh resonating like a melody, and I sat on the porch watching the sun dip low, bleeding orange into the sky. With his eyelids drowsy and his tiny hands encircling his favorite toy dinosaur, Noah sat next to me. Mom? His voice was quiet as he requested. I brushed a lock of hair from his forehead and gazed down. Yes, darling. Do we remain a family? My heart exploded. I raked my fingers through his hair and swallowed hard. I said, We're the best kind of family because we pick each other out. Each and every day. He blinked up at me with those large brown eyes that resembled his father's, but Noah's eyes were warm and wide open, as if they could see right into me, whereas Jason's had always been cold and aloof. I breathed him deeply as I kissed his forehead. We don't need anyone who doesn't choose us back. He nodded as though it made perfect sense after appearing to consider that for a considerable amount of time. Okay, all he needed was that. Children tend to simplify things. I wish I had had it that simple. During the first several months, I kept hoping that the rage would subside and turn into something more manageable. It didn't. However, I was taken aback by how the rage began to feel like something different, something more wholesome. It wasn't resentment. Clarity was the key. Everything was suddenly visible to me, including every lie I had believed, and every way I had shaped myself into ever tinier forms in the hopes that I would eventually fit into the place they had created for me. I had waited for love my entire life, but I would never find it. From Jason, from my parents, perhaps even from Haley, though I doubted she had ever had any to offer. However, some people are only able to love you in fragments. I had finished surviving on scraps. One afternoon, Mara arrived with a half-dead plant under her arm and 2 coffees. It is meant to represent fresh starts or something, she explained, placing it on the table and saying, For the porch. Looks more like it symbolizes neglect, I muttered. Figured it would fit right in, she said with a smile. As the children played in the yard, we enjoyed coffee on the porch. Mara gave me a gentle look. Are you truly finished with them? I no longer even needed to consider it. Yeah. Slowly nodding, she seemed to believe me now, something she had not done previously. You're different. I felt the light warm my face as I reclined on my chair. I think I finally figured out who I am without them. Mara's smile was accompanied by a melancholy expression. Isn't it a lonely thing? Becoming your own. I looked at the children playing in the yard, Noah making something out of sticks and rocks, Emma chasing butterflies. I'm not lonely, I muttered. I'm free. They never expressed regret. Not once. They never made an effort to apologize, express regret, or express that they missed me, or that they were mistaken. The last piece of evidence that I had never thought about was maybe the most difficult. They didn't truly love me as much as I had loved them. However, I believe a part of me has always known that. Grieving over something that was never whole in the first place is difficult. Winter gave way to spring. I began preparing pancakes on Sunday mornings, just like my grandma did. Even though I knew that half of the flours would not withstand Emma's small, overly enthusiastic hands, we nonetheless planted them in the yard. Small and untidy, we created our own customs. And gradually, the pain inside of me changed into something milder, with a somewhat peaceful flavor. I sat by myself at the kitchen table one evening, long after the children had gone to sleep, the same table at which I had penned the note that ended our previous correspondence. I grabbed my phone and started looking through previous pictures of family get-togethers, birthdays and holidays where I had grinned broadly as a tiny hollow pain tore at my chest. I located the group chat that I had abandoned months prior. My thumb lingered over it for a moment. I then erased the entire thread, every message, every memory, all the incarnations of myself that had been pleading for love. Lost. Healing, according to Mara, always occurs in small, silent moments when no one is around to see it. I believe she is correct. It occurs on an arbitrary Sunday morning while you're preparing pancakes, while you're combing through your daughter's hair to remove any knots, as you're instructing your son in shoe tying. When you at last understand that you can be entire without having to be anyone's favorite. I sent my mom a short message the last time I ever did. I should have walked away years ago. Her number was never blocked by me. I didn't have to. She didn't call again. People like to say that family is everything and that blood is thicker than water. However, what nobody ever tells you is, you have the right to leave those who make you feel inferior. It's okay to create a new family out of the folks who consistently support you without being asked. You are free to make your own decisions. What if you are the antagonist in someone else's tale? Well, anything. Being the antagonist in their tale is preferable to being a ghost in mine. Months later, Emma joined me in bed as the sun was rising one morning. She pressed her little, soft body against mine as we cuddled. Mom? Yes, darling? She was still half asleep when she spoke softly. You know we're the greatest family. I held her tight while grinning into her hair. The very best.